How's everyone doing? It's been a long day, right? Yeah? Okay. It's not meant to look like that, but maybe my presentation's failing. It's maybe apt. So today I'm talking about why data mesh will fail, or why your data mesh project will fail. Earlier today, Adric presented on their data mesh journey at ANZ, which I thought was really good. Hopefully most of you saw it. This is maybe a slightly opposing take on data mesh that I'm going to present, but I'll start by talking about who am I. So my name's Josh. I work at Canva. Previous to that, I was in consulting. And despite the fact that I work at Canva today, I'm not talking on behalf of Canva. These are my thoughts. My take on data mesh, definitely informed by my experience, but definitely not for legal reasons and official Canva point of view. So I'm here because, like many people, maybe some of you, data mesh has been this really buzzy topic, but also a really confusing topic. So this is a Twitter thread. The bottom tweet's from Max, who created Airflow, some of you might know. And he's basically saying, like, I feel very confused and disoriented reading about data mesh. And there's a lot of buzzwords and that sort of thing. And I really think part of the reason for that is that the folks behind data mesh have tended to write about it with a lot of jargon. This tweet is from the same Twitter thread, so it's actually a response to Max. Max was trying to understand data mesh, and he was trying to relate it back to warehouses. And Zhamak says, there are no warehouses in a mesh. There are autonomous data product quantums that provide multimodal access to domain data for analytical workloads connected together in a graph, each both transforming and serving and controlling immutable bitemporal data, right? So there's some chance that she was trolling, but I don't think she was, right? And I think this, I don't think there's any will on Zhamak's behalf here. But I think one byproduct of this, an unintentional byproduct, is that it can make people feel stupid. It certainly made me feel stupid, right? I don't understand this. What's wrong? And so I found myself in this weird position where I was kind of rooting against data mesh for no good reason. And so I did the logical thing, and when the book came out, I'm going to buy this book, I'm going to give it some money, and I'm going to read it out of spite, and so I can really, solidify my position of not liking data mesh. But instead of hate reading the book, I found myself adopting a slightly more nuanced position. So, not here to dunk on data mesh. Instead, I'm just going to share some thoughts that I have, some opinions, and maybe a little bit of a guide on potential pitfalls of adopting data mesh in your organization. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of an overview. Just before I start, who here, how do I frame this? Who here is comfortable with what data mesh is? By a show of hands. Okay, good. This is good. Okay, so in 2019, a consultant from ThoughtWorks, Zhamak Dehghani, published this article basically describing a new way of doing data in enterprise organizations. Okay, she went on, write a couple of follow-up articles, and eventually the book that I showed earlier, expanding on these concepts. And I just want to take a moment to kind of scope this talk. It's only 4 years later, but there are a lot of people who mean different things when they say data mesh. So I think I'm going to engage with Zhamak's definition, her definition of data mesh, because I think everything else is not necessarily data mesh, right? So big picture ideas. Okay, so this is the before data mesh time. This is what Zhamak sets up as the thing she's trying to combat. And it's the monolithic data platform where you have data sources that come in. You have a centralized data team that becomes a bottleneck and is unable to scale. And the real byproduct of the system that Zhamak was observing was that data teams were failing to realize the value that they needed to. And this is the after. So this is why it's called a mesh. It's a connected web of nodes. Each of these nodes is a data product, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a sec. But the idea is that you have individual data products. They get organized into business domains. In other words, microservices for data. Okay, but it's a little bit more than that. So let's take a deep dive. So we have 4 principles that Zhamak outlined for data mesh, the 4 pillars, if you like. Okay, we're going to start with domain ownership. Okay, so individual domains, business units, if you like, own their data. And by own, we mean end-to-end. So transformation, serving the data, quality control, everything. So I imagine that monolithic data platform happening many, many times in each data product. Speaking of data products, the second principle is treating data as a product. So basically taking product thinking and elevating your data to the same level as you would any other service in your business. She lists some qualities that data products should have. They should be discoverable, addressable, trustworthy, self-describing, interoperable, and secure. These are all things that we strive for, right? So think of the users of your product, whether that is like a business stakeholder, whether it's a customer, whether it's a service, thinking of them as your customers and really building, documenting, maintaining a world-class product. Next, we have the self-serve data platform. So this is a platform providing capabilities that allow the domains to build the data products. Everything's sort of starting to come together. And the idea is that this is self-serve. It helps avoid duplicated effort. And it's more than just Snowflake or Databricks, right? It's more than storage and compute. This is a wide range of capabilities, and we'll look at the specific capabilities a little bit more later. And the last thing is federated governance. So the whole thing is decentralized. Your governance is being done as a sum of the parts, okay? So let's talk about how it fails. Failure mode number 1. Data mesh solves a problem that you don't have. So data mesh is pretty complex. Zhamak calls it a socio-technical paradigm. And one of my things is you want to avoid complexity as much as you can. So you only want to take on that complexity if it's really going to solve problems. So if you don't have those problems, why would you do it? So let's look at a few things to assess whether data mesh solves problems you have. Are you a large enterprise? So the second word in the original article is enterprise. And yet people, I've read conversations in forums, had conversations with people. I've got a 200-person company. How do I do mesh effectively? And it's just solving a problem that you're not ready for. Hopefully, we all strive to have really successful companies, and at some point you're going to need to take on those problems, but you shouldn't really take them on prematurely. I saw a talk from someone from Deloitte a couple of weeks ago talking about data mesh. He said, if your employees are only in the thousands, you're not big enough to mesh. So we're talking really large organizations. Okay, is your business organized around domains? So domain ownership of data is going to be really hard to enforce if that's not how your business is organized. Perhaps a controversial take. Do you build your own software? This is definitely my opinion. I don't think I've heard Zhamak say this, but I think organizations that don't build their own software are probably not going to have the expertise to really execute on mesh, and I don't think they're probably going to be able to capitalize on the benefits of it either. And lastly, do you have pain, right? If everything's cool, just keep going. You're on the right track, right? So if the answer to most of these questions is no, mesh is probably not a good fit for you. Okay, failure mode 2, only doing some of data mesh. Okay, so Zhamak talks about undesirable consequences of aspects of data mesh, and the 4 principles are meant to sit in balance, sort of counterweights to each other, to avoid those undesirable consequences. So doing some of mesh, she says in her book, doing some of mesh will fail. So let's look at a few examples. So if you just do domain ownership and nothing else, you end up with silos, right? This is something most of us know intuitively. If you do domain ownership and data as a product and just that, you end up duplicating effort, right? And that's the whole point of the self-serve platform. If you do data as a, I'd never considered this until a few weeks ago, but I heard someone say, oh, we were just going to build all the data products for all the domains, start doing data as a product without domain ownership. You're going to get the same bottlenecks, and probably you're going to get worse bottlenecks because you're holding yourself to a higher standard. If you're operating independently, governance becomes fragmented, so you need a system to deal with that, right? So beware partial implementation of the data mesh. Failure mode number 3, no organizational buy-in. Zhamak's vision for data mesh is one of closing the gap between the operational data and the analytical data, that they sit side by side. There's this diagram here from one of our articles. It's literally the circle's meant to represent the business domain, and there's the O and the D, the operational and data APIs coming out of that, right? So because of this, a shift to data mesh requires full engineering buy-in, if not full organizational buy-in. You can't think of data as this sort of downstream recipient of the operational data. It has to be integrated. And because of that, you can't force a domain to suddenly be responsible for its own data. If you've ever tried to force domain ownership, like pushing shit up a hill left, it doesn't really work. So the data team can't decide to mesh on their own. It has to be a larger conversation. Imagine a company where engineering and data report up to 2 different executives, right? If it's going to be really hard to do this if they're not on the same page. And Zhamak says the most successful data mesh implementations have had the backing of C-level executives. So I think can be really tough, or it would be really tough to try and bottom up your way to data mesh. Failure mode number 4, insufficient technology. So the self-serve platform, this is a quote, the self-serve platform offers a proliferation of services that empower data mesh users to do their job. Okay, so what are these capabilities? Documentation, monitoring, discoverability, computational policies, creation, testing, deployment, observability, data sharing, data modeling, networking, storage, security. There's a lot of them. I've lost which ones I've done, right? She splits these up into 3 planes. There's the mesh experience plane, which is, actually, I'm going to read them the other way around. There's the infrastructure utility plane. This is like storage, compute. This is like your lower level abstractions. There's the data product experience plane, which is like the creation and management of data of the individual data products. And then the mesh experience plane, which is basically like how everything connects together, right? Now, of these, I think we're pretty close to solving the bottom one, right? I think that's getting towards a solved problem, but the other 2 really need to be built. And in the book, she says there's no public implementation of these top 2, right? So people have done this. ANZ's building a platform, right? But my take is that a fully functional self-serve platform that does everything that she's articulated, it just doesn't exist. And admirably, Zhamak's trying to build it. Like she's backing in her idea. She's left ThoughtWorks. She's got a startup. She's trying to build the self-serve platform. But the self-serve platform is Mesh's white whale. If it works, Mesh works. It papers over a lot of, not papers over, but it aims to solve a lot of the potential downsides. But without it, you're going to struggle. And the last failure mode is being obsessed with the mesh. I sound a little obsessed with the mesh, I have to admit. We love to build things as engineers, and it's really easy to get caught up in all the implementation details. And there's a lot of jargon around mesh, and you have individual product quanta and sidecars and that sort of thing. And I think one failure mode is losing sight of what mesh is designed to do. It's designed to solve data teams not able to scale and not able to realize enough value. Okay, so obsessing with the mesh risks that you lose sight of the goal, okay? There's a guy, Scott Hurlman, I may be mispronouncing his name. He's like, runs a business called Data Mesh Understanding. He's like one of the foremost proponents of data mesh outside of Zhamak and her organization. And he was on a panel recently, and he said something, I wrote it down straight away. He said, I hope mesh fades into the background, right? Because if mesh is going to be the solution, it shouldn't be the thing we're focusing on. We should be focusing on delivering value to our businesses. Okay, home straight. Takeaway. So we talked about what mesh is, decentralization of data, microservices for data in very brief, and then we went through some failure modes. So solving problems you don't have, only doing part of the mesh, no organizational buy-in, not being able to realize the self-serve platform, and being over-obsessed with the mesh. You might have noticed this talk isn't about whether data mesh will fail, it's about how a data mesh implementation will fail. So the question is, can a data mesh project succeed? It's certainly not for everyone, right? Realizing that self-serve platform, in fact, the whole thing is a really ambitious task. This morning, Adric compared ANZ's data mesh journey to a journey to the moon, right? And I think that's really apt. Like, it's a moonshot, right? It's a big bet. And I think you need to know what you're getting in for, what you're biting off, and be prepared to take that big bet. But at the same time, we need companies to be pushing the boundaries of what we do right now. So I'm really appreciative of those who are bold enough to try, but you need to be aware of the various pitfalls. But what everyone wants to know is, will data mesh succeed? And I don't know. Maybe we find a way to stitch together the self-serve platform in all its glory. Maybe we look back in 10 to 20 years and see this as a fad. But I think the whole thing boils down is, should we always follow software engineering principles? Certainly, there's a lot that we have already borrowed that's really positive. Version control, modularity, environments, testing. We've matured a lot as an industry, but I think we've got a long way to go. But should we always just say, let's do what software engineers did? I don't have an answer to this question. I think about it a lot. Joe said this morning, data and software are not the same, you know? And so I think we should just be cautious about saying, like, hey, software engineering does it, we must do this. I think we should try and filter things through a more critical lens. All of that said, the pain that Zhamak observed when she was consulting with ThoughtWorks, they're real pains. Pains of organizations of a certain size, they're real. And we need people to be doing the sort of like forward blue sky thinking that Zhamak has done with data mesh. Yesterday I listened to a podcast, and she said that she thought mesh got too popular too quick. She kind of described it like we're in the earliest stage, but things kind of got steam really quickly, right? So we need people like Zhamak doing some deep thinking, and there's lots of organizations taking bets on this future and other futures, and that's a really good thing. But let's make sure we keep the delivering business value really at the forefront of what we do and not become obsessed with a silver bullet. Thanks.